Okay, we are back to talk about Severance Season 2, Episode 5, titled Trojan's Horse. Episode 5 is written by Megan Ritchie and directed by Sam Donovan. The episode opens with a mysterious man collecting what looks like dental supplies from O&D before taking them on the elevator that is in the exports hall. Still recovering from the Ortbo experience, Drummond and Natalie convince Helena she has to go back down to the severed floor as Helly and cannot fake it this time. Helly rejoins what remains of the MDR team and ask for a funeral for Irv after learning that he will not be coming back. After eulogizing Irv, Dylan finds a note that Irv left behind the hang in there poster on the wall of the break room that has directions to the elevator that leads to the exports hall. The team gets Helly up to speed when she learns that she's an Egan, that Audi Mark's wife is Gemma, and Helena was using her trickery to pass information back to Lumen when she was posing as Helly. Mark clearly now distrusts Helly and does not reveal to her all that happened when she was being impersonated. Milchick receives his first monthly performance review, where he vows to tighten the leash on his employees and then confronts Mark about having sex with Helena. Outside of Lumen, Rickon, working on his updated copy of the UUR, Irv makes another phone call before noticing that Bert is following him. The two connect and deduce that they must have been romantically involved as innies. The episode ends with Mark visiting with Dr. Rigabi. They're looking through Gemma's old things to try to spark some sort of movement in the reintegration. Mark starts flashing back and forth between his Innie and Audi self, or finally seeing Gemma alive on the severed floor. After Woe's Hollow, I watched this for the first time and thought this was kind of like, I don't know, the cigarette after the sex, I guess, sort of
Yeah,
like a little break. But watching it a second time, there is a lot of interesting stuff here that we can get into.
there is for sure. I mean, I was surprised, first of all, we were talking last week, we were asking all these questions about how that Ortbo fits into the timeline, how they got out there, all that kind of stuff. And we don't really get answers on a lot of the questions we were asking. And I don't know if we will ever on some of them. But my first reaction watching this episode was really sort of surprised that it seems like,
Yeah.
oh no, things were in order, you know. And so now we're after the Ortbo. My
And a
biggest
very,
question remains,
very quick explanation of how they got them to do it and when it was, just over a weekend.
yeah, I mean, almost most of it you have to read into it in that phone call that Mark has with Devin, right? She's like, "How was your work thing this weekend or whatever?" It was fine.
Yeah.
I did note to you we were talking about it by DM and stuff. I do think there's something to read into there, right? So at least I feel like I have an answer on something because Mark says as Annie fell off a rope and got wet. I'm taking that as really indicating that I'm right, that they were all like switched unconscious at the end. Um, Probably switched unconscious in some fashion. I don't know what that looks like
Yeah.
or if we'll ever see it, but to get them out there, because again, it doesn't make sense that the Audis would go out there to the snowy cliffs and then say, "Okay, turn me off." It doesn't make sense. And that, at the end of last week, when Milchek says now, we were also saying, it wouldn't really make sense if he was flipping them back to their Audis then.
Hmm.
So if he flipped them unconscious, Mark had been sitting on the rock by the water. Maybe he slips into the water, because he must have been pretty wet for Lumen to have to tell him, some story about
Yeah,
that.
and in that episode, we see him rush down and sort of help hold Helly after
Yeah,
she comes out of the water, but it's not like he jumps in the water after her. I've seen some people speculate this week that at the part where the three remaining MDR go into Milchick's office at the very beginning and ask for some explanations, he starts to explain to them what the Glasgow block is. And also, the Glasgow block allows Audis to, and Helly interrupts saying, "What? Who was I? What was I doing?" And so there's sort of this explanation that should be coming or might be coming of what they can do and what a Glasgow block is allows them to actually manipulate inside someone's brain.
you don't think it's just as simple as the Glasgow block allows the Audi to persist, on the severed floor or something,
Yeah.
like the rest of the sentence was just something simple like that.
I think that there are, I think it's, well, while not the Glasgow one, it's one of those list of things that's in the security
Hmm.
protocol, right? There was the hive or whatever, there was the
Yeah,
elephant, there
yeah.
was the Glasgow, So it's one of those things that allows them to, yeah, shut off or turn off, turn on, or sort of put in a neutral state, I guess, for lack of a better term.
I'm still kind of wondering about the beehive one. That's the one that stood out to me. Like, what does that, connote? Like
Exactly.
what do you start
Exactly.
imagining with some kind of beehive protocol? Yeah. Also wanted to note quickly, talking about last week's episode, we sort of missed this. We were talking about their doppelgangers and whether they're clones, whether they're perhaps robots. Not that we have an answer on that, but did see a number of people noting that they're listed in the credits as shadows, like
Hmm.
Shadow Mark, Shadow Dylan, etc., and that they were played by other actors, right? So they didn't just have Adam Scott as Shadow Mark; they have a different actor as Shadow Mark.
Right.
And it's interesting that that same actor was credited back in episode one as Man in Hallway, which I take it refers to the man we saw in the hallway when Mark found the wellness office no longer existed.
Yeah, this was
Um,
there and then disappeared for a second. Yeah.
so there's something there to like kind of bear in mind in the background, like what's going on with these shadow versions of them, and maybe we did have indeed seen one of them in the office before, and so on. So I did want to mention that, make sure we
Yeah.
didn't kind of
Yeah.
miss it entirely here. Um, where should we go next?
What about starting with sort of the Helly Mark business,
Okay.
right? So this, they've had revealed at the end of last episode what who Helena was, who Helly was. She comes back down. I understand the sense of, well, we can't trust her now at all because how are we to ever know with 100% certainty that this is Helly? Um, And there's the sense of Mark has done all this work to find Gemma with Helena. He slept with Helena. All the secrets that they were talking about went to Helena. I don't know. Does it seem like he's just being unfair to Helly? I mean, Helly calls him out on it, but in one way, I sort of side with Mark because yeah, you did this even unconsciously.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think his reaction makes total sense. I'm not going to go so
Yeah,
far as I'm say I'm taking his side or something like that, but it makes sense. And one of the things I thought was interesting is how the show makes sure we know that it's the Indy Heliar,
yeah, yeah,
right? We know for sure. We saw that conversation with Natalie and Drummond, and Helena doesn't really want to do it, and so on and so forth, right? So I thought that was kind of interesting um, to approach it that way. So we know for sure. But if you take the perspective of Mark, of course, he doesn't know.
yeah.
How could he know?
How could he
How,
know? Yep,
right?
yep.
Um, and at one point he asked her that, and she said, "Well, you just have to trust me." So how am I supposed to trust you when for a week or whatever it's actually been your outie
Yeah,
down here? And I thought it all played really well. She asks, you really couldn't tell, obviously not, and it makes sense that it would be just like this, basically. I don't think it's
yeah,
going to quite stay like this. Something has to break in one direction or another. Um, but yeah, I definitely did think that was interesting. And further, well, what do you think about the fact that related to all of this, part of Mark's reaction is, oh, well, then nothing matters. There's no reason to continue our mission. They're smarter than us, and so on. What do you think about that aspect of it?
yeah. I don't know if it was sort of a, straw that broke the camel's back moment, but he just seemed like he finally in this season has been, let's push back. Let's move forward. Let's find the answers. Let's get to the bottom of these things. Let's figure out what's happening here. And the person that he likely trusted the most feels like was completely, um, I guess completely turned against him for lack of a better term. And so with as much loss as he's experienced, right, with losing Gemma, with a life that's just been crumbling, with losing Helly or not, Helly not being the person that he thought that she was, he's just at a breaking point, at a giving up point. Why do I even want to start all over again looking for Gemma? Even despite the progress we've made, I don't know, just got a sense of sort of a broken man, just sort of giving up at this point.
Right, which is interesting because Mark's innie has never really been like that. Mark's outie
Right.
has always been like that
Yeah.
in a certain way, right? And I do think that it makes sense. He's also becoming flippant towards Milchick. He's like, hey, did Miss Wong take notes for an
Yeah.
article in the bullshit Gazette?
Bullshit. Exactly.
Yeah, because he's kind of seeing through things, but at the same time, then his reaction is like, all right, fine, let's just work, you
Yeah.
know.
I did see
Um,
an interesting theory about this. I forget if this was, I'm reading too much. I'm too much online about this show, but one thing that hypothesized that they're positioning him to act that way at work because it mirrors how he acts as an outie self. So as he reintegrates, it's harder to tell the difference between, oh, this is no longer any Mark. This must be someone else.
yeah, and I did have this thought. I think I said something briefly in the article I wrote, my recap article, which people can go check out on tvobsessive.com. I encourage you to do so. I think I said something at least briefly about this, though. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, I think it works really well because to kind of start over. I think this is correct. I think
Hmm.
that the writers and so on have done something that really works well insofar as the change in the demeanor of any Mark
Yeah.
is going to create some cover for the possibility of a reintegrated Mark at work.
Hmm.
Whereas, just a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting here saying, Mark can't show up reintegrated. They're going to see right through that immediately, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, at least how I'm thinking about it, the fact that any Mark would be reacting in this sort of way to the events that he's experienced makes sense just in terms of any Mark. So
Yeah.
I think they've set it up in a way, you know, you could complain about it seeming like almost too fortuitous or something that the two things align, but
Yeah.
whatever, it's a TV show. So I do think that's interesting because at the same time, we could start speculating that, well, part of the change in his demeanor already is from the reintegration process as well, right?
Yeah. So we get a little bit more about that process in this episode. It looks like it involves a lot of pills. It involves a pretty disgusting looking juice diet.
I don't want to say what that actually reminds me of. It's what he's drinking. I don't know. It looks pretty
Yeah.
gross. Let's leave it at that.
And he gives us the impression that it's quite
Mm-hmm.
disgusting to drink. Regabi is sort of pushing back on moving fast on this, but then they start going through Jim's things, and he's having these headaches at work. There's a cough that's sort of unexplained, and then at the end, of course, we see this flipping back and forth where it seems like it's his outie self seeing or being on a severed floor. But I don't know. I always thought reintegration was you're combining the memories in the mind of both of these things, not like you're flipping back and forth in between places in sort of a hallucinogenic state.
Right, except if you think back on what we've seen with Petey,
Yeah,
he was having similar kinds of struggles. He was having flashes
right.
and things like this. He never achieved some kind of full reintegration that was, I don't know, harmonious, if you like.
Yeah.
So I'm with you insofar as like you want to think that should be the idea, but
Hmm.
I do think it makes sense that if you think about the innie and the outie as just such separate consciousnesses to the point of functionally being distinct persons
Yeah.
in their identity, that trying to like merge those together would not be a smooth thing. So I think it makes sense, the um hearing Miss Casey tell him about facts about his outie
Yeah.
um landed for me in a more direct way as something that he'd be experiencing. The visuals, I was a little less sure how we were supposed to read them. I mean, I thought
Yeah,
it worked as
yeah,
a TV show, but like, um, what
Yeah,
Mark
those sort of
is.
auditory cues you can think of, well, there's memories reemerging, but it's sort of, to go from his basement to the floor and
Yeah.
then seeing Gemma, who is, or Miss Casey, as far as we know, is not on that floor. She is down in the testing floor, the exports hall. So sort of this pseudo reality of what's actually happening there.
Well, right, and she wouldn't have been saying these lines in the hallway. They would have been in the wellness office and so on. Whatever, right? I
Yeah,
think just accept it. But
yeah, yeah.
um, I mean, I did think it was well done there. I also wanted to note, how going back to Helly, um, how Mark doesn't want to tell her anything, doesn't care what happened to her when she took the place of Rowdy. Dylan drops that Miss Casey is Mark Saudi's wife, but there is no indication that Helly's been informed that Mark Saudi's wife is supposed to be dead. I don't know. I thought
That's a good point. I
was
hadn't
noted.
even put that together yet. Yeah, she's given information about who she is. Does she even know the wellness is closed? Does she know that Miss Casey is no longer there? Yeah, I don't think she has that information yet. Maybe we're just left to presume that that's part of other extracurricular conversations. But yeah, she's not directly given that information.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Just because they are clearly playing with what Heliar knows and what she doesn't know. She doesn't
Mhm.
know that Mark and Audi Helena hooked up in the tent. Milchick presents that to Mark almost as a threat towards the end of the episode. I, I think she's going to find out, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. I
and
mean,
it's just kind of where we go from there.
and how does Milchick know? I mean, I presume they were watching them or something, or
Lumen
cameras
is
in the tent.
listening, right?
Yeah, always.
Lumen is listening. Um, we've got the speaking of Milchick, his performance review, which I thought was quite entertaining. I presume that it was Miss Wong who made the complaints about him using big words and putting paper clips the wrong way. You with me on
I
that?
I, I loved the interaction between Milchick and Miss Wong in this episode. She's clearly not happy with the status of what their working relationship is, and she's finally starting to push back a little bit. She's like, "Well, what's the way I can push back more? Oh, I can tell them about his improper use of paper clips and using big words." Yeah, that's exactly how I read it as well.
Yeah, I think she was the source. She made, and she was probably a meaningful source on the calamitous Ortvo also.
Probably so.
Um, so she's funny. They insist on having a funeral for Irv. Miss Wong doesn't think they should do this because it makes them feel like people. And that's deepening her character
Yeah.
as well. But I also noted in the margins here that Milchick asked her to prepare a bereavement kit, and she says she thought those were for people who died on the severed floor. There's definitely implication here that sometimes people die on the severed floor.
Yeah, I guess goat accident, or
Yeah,
you fell on some of the dental instruments, or I don't know, but yeah, apparently they're prepared for that type of scenario.
we've got the machine that makes melon heads ready.
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of machine with a blade that carves people's heads out of watermelons, so that there could be an accident there, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a 3D melon printer kind of
Yeah,
thing going on. Must be something like I don't know why I really found myself, particularly when I was rewatching this episode last night. Um, I found myself getting hung up on the melon for a minute. It was like, why do they like melons so much? And like at one point you see Dylan just eating this like massive piece of melon head.
yeah.
It was like no way that I would not want to eat that much melon in like a week.
There's good,
And
just as a little aside, there's good melon and scotched egg content on the official Severance podcast this week. If anybody wants to check it out, they talk
uh,
about those decisions. So
we'll have to
quite
check that
quite
out.
interesting.
Have to check that out. Um, so we have the bereavement ceremony. Miss Long does not get to play theremin, but the whole thing's entertaining. You mentioned in your summary, hey, we were right, basically, in drawing the connection to the hang in there poster because Irving has put the directions to the exports hall behind it. Dylan finds them, puts it back. Um, Presumably, we'll pick up on that later,
Yeah,
right?
I think this is a great way to keep Dylan and Irving connected, right? For Dylan to sort of pick up the pieces of Irving's search and go take this for him, and hopefully it ends in somehow, some way them reuniting. But I also have to think that I was struck by if Dylan saw that and put the pieces together that quickly during a funeral, is Milchick not going to check that poster? I mean, he clearly told Irv to stop talking after he said hang in there. So is he not checking that as well?
Yeah, has he not put it together? Maybe.
Yeah.
I guess, or we have to consider the other possibility. As you said, how did Milchick know about the sex? Well, because they were watching or listening, right? Milchick told them previously in the season that they weren't being watched in that break room, which is now more like a break room in the traditional sense. Do we believe that? Yeah. So does Milchick know that that's there or not?
Yeah.
Um, he's kind of on an interesting arc. I mean, he's not super happy about the performance review, clearly, but not just in the way of, I don't know how to put this. Not he's not just like a dedicated employee who got a bad performance review and is sad about it. It seems like he's irked a little bit
Yeah,
more.
he's
Um,
on an island right now. He is solo. There is no one who seems to be on his side or standing up for him or that is his ally. I mean, also clocked for whatever it's worth in that regard. This is the third of five episodes where we have zero Harmony Cobell
mhm.
in this season. Whether that's going to lead to something with her returning, I don't know, but he just is, I mean, a guy alone adrift right now with no one seems to be on his side.
Yeah, and I thought about this when he tries to ask Natalie about her experience receiving the paintings. My first reaction was, we didn't need this. We
Yeah.
already got this before. We already read their facial expressions before. But I started thinking about it another way that the one positive in his performance review was that he received the paintings with grace. And here he's kind of tried to connect with Natalie about how, oh, of course I appreciate them, but they're kind of racist, right? Like
Yeah.
let's connect a little bit here. And she totally refuses that. Natalie seems to be in a real position of power at Lumen. I mean, I don't know. Is she really? Maybe we don't know. She's kind of the voice of the
Yeah.
board. Does she
Yeah.
herself have any power? I guess we don't know, but
I think A, don't forget about Milchick's excellent urinalysis that's
yeah.
come back.
I'm sorry. Yes.
B, I think that although she, even more so than Milchick, can't reach out this hand, they're both looking for connection, relationship, empathy, something with with all that they're having to deal with. And I think Milchick is willing to do it, trying to do it. Natalie just doesn't feel like she can.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely read it that way. Great face acting
Yes.
from Natalie in particular. But yeah, so the isolation is where Milchick, but then Drummond says, we got to get back to basics, treat them as what they really are, right? You noted that line in our notes here. I already noted the what Miss Wong says about making them feel like people. Another scene Helena says they're animals. Further thoughts along these lines? I mean, it's
Yeah,
largely like a
I just
dehumanization, right?
I just clocked the fact that this is certainly an Egan characterization of who they are, but just sort of like what do they think they are? But almost to this point, when you say things like that, they're effing animals, makes them feel like people, treat them as what they really are. It's almost like they just think they're slaves and they're subhuman and they're people, or not even people. They are um just labor to be exploited for whatever end they want. And we're getting more depth of how that goes within not only the family but the workers, sort of like Miss Wong within Lumen.
Yeah, I think that's good. I question it a little bit only in terms of how I've said multiple times, I think we have to take the Kier Egan stuff seriously. So, like, or going back to the piece I wrote after season one, the kind of theory type piece, I kept
Mhm.
insisting that Lumen really does care about its employees, and that's what's terrifying. It's
Yeah.
not that they just want to exploit you; it's that they really do care.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know how that fits together with this stuff, but I think you're on the right track in terms of um they are not being viewed as, certainly they're not being viewed as like persons with rights, you know.
Yeah. To have
Um,
Wong and Drummond, I mean, sort of like the two ends of the employee spectrum, right? To say those things, make them feel like people. We don't want that, and treat them what they really are. There's no explanation there. But yeah, just sort of clock that they're making a point to tell us their, again, sort of the eganization of these workers.
yeah. Well, we saw, okay, so we need to talk about Irving a bit more.
Yeah.
Starting in the office, I just wanted to note a couple of things here, right? Because Milchick does give in and let them have a bereavement event or whatever they call it. Um, I love the scene when they get back to MDR and they've got their new work tri stations, and Dylan's like, if you're taking feedback, I hate it, and is kind of like refusing to go
Yeah.
to this like trifle desk. But then also, I thought it was interesting. I wanted to note this: the photos of the team.
Yes. Yes.
Irving's been taken out of the photo.
Yes.
What I think is interesting to note here is back in season one, when Petey left, they took a new photo with
Yeah.
Helly, and there are kind of extended scenes in terms of Mark changing out the photos and all of that, right? So they didn't do that here. Instead, they simply like photoshopped Irving out, right? Now, one thing this put me in mind of was Leon Trotsky. Do you know the connection I'm making already, or
I'm trying to connect that, but no, you're gonna have to tell me what it is.
all right? I know we're running short on time. I'll try to do this quickly. There is a famous photo of Stalin and someone else, at least, is still in it, and I'm blanking. And Trotsky was originally in the photo. Leon Trotsky was a significant member of, the Communist Party, and as the beginnings of the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, 1917, all of that kind of stuff. And Trotsky's really interesting because he had a real line, a real kind of democratic through line, philosophically speaking. Anyway, short version: Stalin and Trotsky had a falling out, and Stalin had him removed from this photo as though he had never been a part of the Communist Party at all.
Yeah, yeah.
They further exiled Trotsky, um, but that wasn't good enough. They eventually had him killed.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I'm drawing a parallel here between Trotsky and Irving, to be clear. Both removed from the photo, both have been exiled. So is Luhmann going to ultimately say exiling Irving isn't good enough? We have to kill him.
Yeah, especially if something comes to light of what's been speculated over and over again that there is some past to Irving within Lewin. There's some other connection to Luhmann that Irving has. He clearly has been researching them. He's been trying to find out who they are. Yeah, if those things are uncovered, if they have not already been uncovered, then we just need to not just fire Irv. We need to put an end to Irv.
Yeah, because what is he doing out there? Who's he calling on the phone?
Exactly.
We have that question. Still, best guesses are things like he's calling Ragabi, but I don't know if that tracks quite. We know there's also some whole mind collective, or maybe they're just figures we don't know at all yet. Um, so that's a big question. I presume we'll get some answer to. And
Yeah,
then I
yeah.
am really curious to see what happens between him and Bert. They don't seem to know each other on the outside. Their interaction here, though, is really good and entertaining. Apparently, Irving's going to come over for eat some ham,
Yeah.
bring.
And you're just going to invite somebody into your your relationship that you think you might have been romantically entangled with. But I was trying to clock if either one of them was sort of playing coy or faking that they knew the other one or were aware of the
Yeah,
relationship. And I couldn't quite tell, but that might still be there, and I just couldn't grab it.
yeah, I felt that ambiguity as well, but I think it probably they don't know, and it works to read it that way.
Yeah.
I loved when Bert says, "We like red wine, expensive." What a G. I was like,
It was
bring us, bring expensive red wine.
what was the it was a very Christopher Walken line, just something like I have something about people that show up to my door, call it a
Call it a
quirk.
quirk.
Yeah, just very Walken line.
Yeah, it's great. So I'm glad we're getting more Christopher Walken. As you mentioned, we haven't seen Misco Bell. Narratively, I think that makes sense. You know, how she worked in at the beginning of the season, that made sense. But now it kind
Yeah,
of makes sense for her to be gone. I presume we will see her again, though. I presume that character will re-enter the story.
certainly, certainly so.
Let's see what else things we want to hit. Make sure we hit the changes to Rickon's book. Mostly, I just found this entertaining.
Uh,
The
the Rickon actor is the one who's featured on the podcast this week, and he has some very interesting takes on Rickon and who
oh
that
yeah,
character.
Michael
Yeah.
Chernus. That's great. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I noted in my recap of how he says Trojan's horse, and I thought that
Yes.
was a nice little element of how he gets that just a little wrong, you know. But the way he gets it a little wrong kind of indicates like maybe he doesn't really know the story of the Trojan horse, you know.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Oh, I have to. I cannot leave without telling you this because I clocked this when I read your piece 1 hour after I listened to the podcast. Michael Chernus describes Rickon as fake erudite, and you did as well in your piece recapping this week. So you guys are tracking on the
Same
same path.
words.
Yes,
Yeah,
same word.
there we go. I wrote it first. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about the podcast, but I haven't heard the podcast when I wrote it anyway. You noted in your summary that the beginning, the tools we see are dental tools. You know, so if anyone was curious about that, that's definitely something I confirmed. I don't know why they're sending a dentist down to the testing floor. Someone needs a root canal or something.
This is just, I don't know, final polish pieces on somebody they're cloning down there or, doing some dental work to make sure they look right. I mean, it's just wild speculation. Who knows?
Is it a clue that he's whistling Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald? Who is the actor? Because they are at pains to not show us his face. I definitely have a guess about that based on who's on the cast list, but I don't know if that would feel like a spoiler. So I'll
Yeah, we
refrain.
may save that for the next time.
But I think we're going to see him again because
Yeah.
I think I know who the actor is based on looking at the cast list, and if it is that actor, then we're going to see him again. But I mean, also like how they seed this in here. This is you've got to follow up on this, and so
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing where that goes. Anything else you want to hit on before we wrap up here?
No, I think that's it. We've got episode 6 coming up. Attila. Wonder what that's in reference to.
Yeah, I mean Attila the Hun, and I don't know. We'll see. Um, oh, we didn't mention how Drummond says completing the Cold Harbor file will be one of the greatest moments in the history of the planet.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, that's something
so
that's clearly going to come up. I mean, you think fire, founding penicillin, finishing Cold Harbor. These are the greatest moments in our play, but we'll see what that means.
yeah, I mean it did remind me of how last week Milchick told the Innies during the Ortbo that the waterfall was the tallest one on the planet. But the context is so different here. I don't know. Am I supposed to be thinking about that or not? I don't think this is
Exactly,
like
exactly right. Yeah,
a lie or hyperbole quite like that. It seems like Lumen does think, hey,
yeah.
when we complete this project, it's going to be, as significant as the creation of fire or something. So, um, all right. Thanks as always for listening. Hopefully, you enjoyed the podcast. If so, please do leave a good rating, review, what have you. If you're on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow TV Obsessive on social media. You can search for TV Obsessive. And of course, be sure to check out the website, tvobsessive.com, where you can find weekly recaps by yours truly on Severance, along with articles about any number of other TV shows. And we'll be back with you next week.
All right, see you then.